Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Diplomatic Center. I would now like to welcome the Prime Minister to address us.
Thank you very much, Minister of Communication. A very good afternoon to you, members of the media, members of the viewing and listening public. I normally take the opportunity, depending on the time of day, to speak with members of the media either on my way out or on my way in whenever I travel on the business of the people of Trinidad and Tobago, because it gives me an opportunity to apprise you as to the purpose for my travel and also to report to you the contents of the interactions that we've had once we work outside. However, when we get in at late hours of the night, like I did on this occasion, or leave at the door at the middle of the night, it is kind of inconvenient to keep that schedule. So I'm happy that you are able to be here this afternoon so that I could brief you on my recent visit to Washington. You may recall that at an earlier time, I did indicate to you that the work program that we were pursuing would involve sometime in the not too distant future 2 visits that I plan to make during the month of September. The first was a diplomatic mission to Washington to pursue certain initiatives. And the second, which takes place at the end of the month, the last week of this month, is to the General Assembly of the United Nations, where I propose to make my first appearance. Well, the visit to Washington was well planned and I must say extremely well executed by our staff in Washington and our lobbyists, because as you know, we have on assignment in Washington a firm that lobbies for Trinidad and Tobago at the corridors of power in Washington. They all have done extremely well, and in the short stay there, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, we were able to accomplish even more than we anticipated. It was very hectic, but very useful. There were 3 areas of interest and activity which have been attracting our attention and taking up a lot of our effort in the recent past. And those 3 areas which involve the United States government and its decision making in Washington, we have been continuously at the level of the mission and at the level of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, been continuously in touch with persons of interest to us and persons who have been cooperating with us to indicate and to learn from and to work with those persons. But the time had come for me as leader of the country to get involved and to ensure that where decisions are being made, that such decisions are being made with the necessary information and the clarity that we would like. So this mission allowed me to get there at a time which was very interesting. It was when the budget is under review for the United States, and people had just come back from their summer vacation. So last week was the time when one could guess that most of the people in Washington who you wanted to see would have been there because of the business that they were engaged in. So we chose that time to visit. Of course, having done so, there was a downside to that too, a little bit of downside in that we had to fix our meetings between the votes that were taking place in the various houses. So that was interesting for us. But more importantly, there was only one of the persons we wanted to meet who we did not meet, even though there was an agreement for that meeting to take place, and that was Representative Clyburn, who is a very senior person, and he could not be in Washington because he had personal issues at home, family issues, and could not. And we wish him well and keep him in our prayers. But I was able to meet with my team. I was accompanied by the Foreign and CARICOM Minister, Minister Moses, and the Minister of National Security, and Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister, Minister Stuart Young, and Ambassador Philip Spencer, and some of our other staff up there. We met with the House Majority Leader in the House of Representatives, Mrs. Steny Hoyer, who is the second-ranking member of the House Democratic Leadership. We also met with the caucus chairman, the House Democratic Caucus chairman, Representative Hakeem Jeffries, and he's the fourth-ranking member of the House leadership, Democratic leadership. We also met with a number of persons, either individually or in groups, persons who are members of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Houses. We met with Representative Elliot Angel. He is chairman of the House Committee on Foreign Affairs. Representative Michael McCall, he's from Texas, a Republican. He's the Republican leader, the ranking member on the House Committee on Foreign Affairs and chairman of the House Committee on Homeland Security. We met with Representative Gregory Meeks, a senior member of the House Committee on Foreign Affairs. Representatives Albio Series, chairman of the House Committee on Foreign Affairs and subcommittee on the Western Hemisphere, Civil Security and Trade. We met with Representative Joe Wilson, senior member of the House Committee on Foreign Affairs, and we met with Senator Tim Kaine, a senior member of the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations. So these were all people who we met in the context of our foreign affairs issue. And needless to say, the bulk of the conversations that we had and the interactions that we had were on the Venezuelan issue. And we had some very good interaction, very enlightening interactions. So we feel that we did accomplish our mission in meeting these decision makers, these influencers of US policy on the issue of Venezuela. We also met in the context of security and crime fighting. We met with Representative Benny Thompson, who is the chairman of the Committee on Homeland Security. And we had a very, very fruitful discussion with him, long and fruitful discussion with him and his team on the whole matters of our cooperation, ongoing cooperation, and our extended cooperation with respect to matters of national security, training, personnel, information sharing, and so on. And the third matter that was of interest to us, and in this case you may recall that I didn't only go there as Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. I went there also in the context of my position as a person holding the responsibility for security at the level of the CARICOM, and also member of the heads of government, where a major issue which has been attracting our attention meeting after meeting and of great concern and nervousness in the CARICOM, this whole business about financial services and de-risking of financial services in the region in the context of the new rules that are being applied to us with or without our involvement and our consent. So from that standpoint, we were extremely pleased to meet with Representative Maxine Waters, who is the chairman of the House Financial Services Committee. And we also met with Senator Ben Cardin. He's a senior member of the Foreign Relations Committee, and he's the ranking member of the subcommittee on the Western Hemisphere. So all of these people, we were able to meet and to have face-to-face discussions, and they were very well briefed as we were on our way there. They were very well briefed to receive us, so we had very fruitful and direct discussions. And we are very pleased now that we are in a much better position to go forward on issues which are of mutual interest to Trinidad and Tobago and the United States. I should tell you that two of those meetings generated a commitment from the relevant officers who are in charge an indication that they would want in the very near future to hold hearings on two subjects which are of interest to us. Hearings at the Parliament of the United States, at the committees that are involved on Venezuela and also on financial services, particularly with respect to the relationship between the United States banks and their nervousness of the risk that they seem to not want to carry in doing business with us. We have a commitment for hearing on financial services. This is a far-reaching development, and if they are able to schedule those hearings, CARICOM would be very present at their convenience. We also are very pleased to receive on the 8th of October a congressional committee led by Representative Benny Thompson, who would come and visit us here in Trinidad and Tobago and would spend 2 or 3 days. During that time, we'll have the opportunity to not just speak to them, but to show them our country. You would be amazed how we think that we are known, and we think that because we talk, somebody hears us. But the schedules of these individuals and these committees are so large, and we are so small in the scheme of things that it's very easy to pass unnoticed, or worse, to be misrepresented by other people's points of views. So we have accomplished our mission in that way, and we now will work. We have certain commitments which we will observe with the fluctuation of time. We intend to continue working very closely with the United States, its agencies and its officers, because we have so much in common. So basically, if you have any questions on that, I would take those questions now. Yes.
So you said the issue of Venezuela comes up. A lot of the people that you met were Democrats, I believe, but some Republicans too.
Yeah.
Did you find that?
But remember, the Democrats control the House, so all the major people in the committees are Democrats.
The president being Republican. That's my
yeah,
question.
But that is,
Did you find there was a fundamental difference between the two in how Trinidad has dealt with the Venezuelan situation, and were there any requests or demands or concerns raised by them on how we've handled the Venezuelan situation?
No, they really, when you meet with these officers of state, they put their country first, something that we would do well to learn. They didn't come to us talking to us about their political party position. All of them talk to us in the context of the United States and its interests outside its border. So that's just how the discussions went. They didn't all have the same point of view on everything, because there are certain things that are, for example, there was something that happened during the time that we were there, which was of great interest to us. And if you have been following this issue, you would have seen a very strong statement from Antigua, published, because Antigua was also out in Washington knocking on doors by way of its representative, Sir Ron Sanders. And our ambassador took a little time off from us in between to go to a meeting of the OAS, because as we keep our eyes on what is happening, what happened while we were in Washington is that there was an OAS meeting, a series of meetings, I should say, and we pay attention to what's going on out there. Because you may recall that in January, when this threat of military force in Venezuela to bring about regime change took place, the OAS was out front using its Lima group contacts, attempting to bring about regime change by force. Trinidad and Tobago never joined the Lima group, and CARICOM, of which we are part and a leader, never agreed to the eschewing of dialogue and negotiation in favor of regime change by intervention. That clearly has not taken place as some persons had intended in January and February. But then that expectation is not dead, because what happened last week was that certain members of the OAS who are members of something called the Rio Treaty, of which Trinidad and Tobago is a member by virtue of having joined in the early 60s. But this Rio Treaty is not really in step with the current arrangements. The Rio Treaty was a treaty that was put in place by the OAS soon after World War II, and that treaty literally calls upon members to intervene where that treaty membership is of the view that there was misbehavior in any country in the region. So you can imagine, we are now being told that there's a vote on the Rio Treaty. So what had not happened in January or February is now to appear before us again in the context of the Rio Treaty, when a significant number of members of the OAS, particularly CARICOM members, are not members of the Rio Treaty. So a vote was taken, our representative was there. Trinidad and Tobago abstained on the vote. We did not support the action, but there was also abstention from some South American countries, mainly Chile, Costa Rica, and Panama, right? So people are beginning to back away from and to not vote in support of these invocations of treaty interpretations, which carry with them the potential for intervention by invitation. So that is going on, and in fact, it was interesting that we were in Washington at the time when this was happening, so we were able to express our view very clearly to those who, some people who were even unaware that this was happening. But we continue to monitor it because there's another vote to be taken sometime in the next few days, or on the margins of the UN General Assembly. The decision was that when we meet in New York next week at the General Assembly, there'll be a further gathering of this OAS group where Trinidad and Tobago is a member and Cuba is also a member. But at the last vote, Cuba was not invited. We were there, but we didn't support it. We expect that everybody will be there in New York, and there is going to be another vote to see whether, in fact, the Rio Treaty could be invoked to bring about regime change in Venezuela. CARICOM's position is firm. We do not support intervention to bring about regime change on the interpretation of people outside of our interests. So that is there, and you may want to pay attention to that to see how it goes, because we'll keep you informed along the way.
Because you kind of got a little distracted, and I asked if they had put any pressure on you or if they had raised any concerns.
No. All our meetings were very friendly, very cooperative, and in fact, we are very pleased to announce that all the United States officers we spoke to indicated a willingness, and in fact, I may say an eagerness to work closely with Trinidad and Tobago going forward. And it is out of that we are receiving this delegation next week, and we have other commitments which we are not prepared to speak to at this time.
U.S. Congressman, how divergent are the views on policy with Venezuela? Is it as sharp as it was several months ago, or is there?
Well, it is not for me to speak about how divergent their views are, because they could change their position overnight, depending on what the country's interests call for. But what we do know, and not only the United States, but the appetite for military intervention has subsided considerably. If you may recall, when this thing started to become an international problem, because Venezuela had a problem for a very long time. But in January, when intervention was offered as the solution, we had the situation of the European Union giving an 8-day ultimatum to the Venezuelan government. We also had other ultimatums being given by other persons. What we have seen over time, and now that we've come back from Washington and talked to a number of people face to face, the appetite for that is not where it was in January. And of course, I just mentioned to you that some countries that voted with the Lima group in January are now not voting on the Rio Treaty invocation. As a matter of fact, Costa Rica put in an amendment to what was going on at the OAS last week, the amendment meant to bind members to not do that. However, that amendment was defeated, Costa Rica did not support what was being advanced, and other countries who had not voted against that direction have now, so it's no longer CARICOM and Mexico and Uruguay. There are other countries now saying, hold it, watch it, or don't do it.
What was your view on the registration of Venezuela?
We have, as a matter of fact, to the extent that that was mentioned, we have been congratulated for what our little country had done in the face of a big problem. All those who are aware of what we had done, we have 16,000 Venezuelans within our border. We've registered them all, including approximately 2,000 children, and they are here without let or hindrance as part of our national hospitality. And all those who are aware of that and didn't mention it, they mentioned it in the context of our country having done well in a difficult situation, and also being concerned about us in the face of a larger emigration from a larger Venezuelan problem. And that is why we are finding common ground in not encouraging any action which could worsen the emigration from Venezuela. However, that did not prevent the BBC from this morning going out of their way to misrepresent the position in Trinidad and Tobago. And I must say, as a lifelong listener and respecter of the BBC, the program that the BBC mentioned on Trinidad and Tobago today is not worthy of the BBC. Everybody around have an agenda, and I am not to believe that there are people in the BBC who allow themselves to be part of other people's agenda. The BBC is too sacred to us in the Commonwealth for that nonsense to go on. We here in Trinidad and Tobago since January have been facing this Venezuelan matter openly. And we came up with a solution, the country's solution, supported by the cabinet, talked to our country about it, executed it. We gave notice of a registration period. We had a 2-week registration period. On the day when the last registration took place, there was nobody in the line to be registered that night, Sunday night. And we offered, if any others turned up, by the following Sunday, we were going to continue over the weekend. That didn't happen. So it is quite wrong for the BBC to put a program out there today saying that we have 40,000 Venezuelans here and we registered 16,000 and we did not allow the other 14,000 to be registered. That is feeding into agendas of people who want to say that because we have 40,000 or 60,000 or 80,000 of these numbers, they are pulling from all over the place. I don't know where they were getting those numbers from. We made it quite clear. If you are a Venezuelan in Trinidad and Tobago, come forward and be registered. If you choose not to come forward and be registered, you are not welcome here. Made it very clear. So anybody who didn't come forward to be registered, well, too bad for you. I don't know that there are 14,000 or even 14 Venezuelans here who wanted to be registered in that 2-week period who didn't. So that we take objection to, and as a matter of fact, the BBC is a government agency in the UK, and we'll make a formal complaint to the British government about that, because we are small, but we are not insignificant. And whatever we do, we don't mind you saying that we have done it, but we don't want you misrepresenting us in this very dangerous world.
You know, if they had reached out to your office or the National Security Office for comment while they were here during the...
They don't have to reach out to anybody. Our information was public information, executed over a 2-week period in full public view, and we spoke in the Parliament. We were questioned at length by our colleagues in the Parliament. So anybody who wanted to know what we had done or what our policy is, what our actions were, could have had it from the public domain. They didn't have to speak to us about picking up a handful of people outside the Oval, talking about they didn't want Venezuelans here, and use that as the country's position, when in fact anybody who knows anything about this issue in this country will know that the vast majority of people in Trinidad and Tobago were not of that ilk and did not behave like that. So for the BBC to pick up that and put that out and to portray our country in that way, I take strong objection to that.
They didn't say that they sought an interview.
Sought an interview room. Sought an interview with whom? I just said, the BBC didn't have to seek any interview to be able to get our story straight. Our story is a public story. And to the extent that they sought interviews, I don't know that any BBC person has any difficulty, if their motives are honorable, to speak to any member of my government, including myself. I know of no such approach, and I have heard no other minister speak about that. This came like a bolt out of the night, and I find it very interesting that just as we are about to go to the UN in a few days for the interesting discussions that I just mentioned, for example, the story speaks about 40,000 people in Trinidad and Tobago. We know it's about 16,000. So it's wrong by about, what? It's wrong by a huge percentage. They speak about 4 million Venezuelans who were gone out. Is that wrong too by the same percentage? If you're so wrong about what I know about in Trinidad and Tobago, why should I take you seriously when you say 4 million Venezuelans have left? So this is an era where people are subscribing to a view that truth does not matter. Is what you can get people to believe that matters. And I'm disappointed that the BBC is subscribing to that.
Ask if the government has a communications problem, because these people come down here they want information. We as reporters have lots of problems getting through, let's say, to immigration.
You don't start that. You don't start that at all. You have no problem getting through to this government, and I as Prime Minister frequently stand here and answer every question that you have. And you can tell me now one question you put to any minister on this issue that wasn't answered. This particular issue was so publicly ventilated, but we don't all agree on the same thing. So because you don't agree, doesn't mean that you should go out and misrepresent the facts. And we are not accepting that we have a communication problem where this is concerned. It is not an absence of a communication that caused these people to misrepresent our circumstance.
Because we on a week-to-week basis have lots of problems in contacting all the different agencies of government. Lots of problems. I mean, the platform
are you justifying what the BBC has done?
I'm saying.
Are you justifying what the BBC has done?
I have not seen the report, but I'm saying.
Well, then let's change the conversation then.
There is a question.
If you have not seen the report, but you're prepared to advance a case that it could be that we have a communication problem, why foreigners are misrepresenting public information. Anybody who is interested in us and our circumstance would have known that we had a registration. They knew we did that. But what they reported is that we left out thousands of people who wanted to be registered. Where they got that from? The official position of this country is that we registered 16,520 odd persons. That is what happened here in full public view on live television. And if you follow us because you are interested in us, you would have seen us in the parliament answering those questions. So you don't get up and fabricate stories about us and then come and tell me that it is because we have a communication problem. This world is a place now in 2019 going forward where people are making a career of not speaking the truth, and every item of information has to be checked and double-checked. And not everybody with a microphone is your friend. And the UN was wrong too, because they started the 40,000. And when we asked them how many persons they had registered, they said 12,000 or something like that. So from day one, there were people with their own agendas who had intended to inflate the numbers so as to create a certain kind of circumstance to put this country under pressure. Eh? There are people who are demanding that we declare refugee status for people in our country. We have said we are dealing with economic migrants. And we'll screen them. And the policy was very clear. If as we screen you, you have criminal records, we deport you. And I understand that there are a number of those persons who are so qualified, and they will be deported if they have a criminal record.
If I could just bring it back a little bit. When you had these meetings, there is an election happening in the US, and you said, you know, they kept their party politics out of it. Were there any promises made or requests made to say, if the Democrats come into power, we will? Did any of that happen?
No. We don't interfere. This meeting is not about interfering with who comes into power. It was a meeting with the United States government, agencies, and officers. So it matters not who is in power. We will have that relationship with the United States. Different person might be in office, I don't know, but the relationship between Trinidad and Tobago and the United States is a country-to-country relationship.
Expand on the financial aspect of it, getting us out of the blacklist. You said that was the second one of the things that was raised.
No, what is happening is that the discussion we had was the whole question of de-risking. And it's a problem that has Bermuda, Bahamas, Trinidad and Tobago, Belize. So these small countries, many of whom financial services is the lifeblood of the economy. What has been happening is that the larger countries, in the face of new rules, the rules of FACTA, the rules of Global Forum, and bilateral rules, and of course there are action being taken in some cases without rules, and just take positions on us. You would have probably seen that sometime early on, our country was given a negative rating because we were, they accused us of being a tax haven. There isn't a single bank in this country that's an offshore bank, but we were lumped and accused by Europeans of being a tax haven, and were put on a list of countries to watch. So these are things that as a government we have to be alert to, and we have to fight them. We had to go all the way to Slovakia or somewhere in Poland or somewhere out there at a meeting as a CARICOM, authorized persons to go and speak for us to say that is not true and this is not right. The rules cannot just be applied to us arbitrarily. In some cases, like in Grenada, where Grenada had complied, having met all the requests for compliance, and having complied, they still then got the book thrown at them. So this is what is happening to us as small countries. And that is why when we sat down and spoke to Maxine Waters about what the banks are doing and saying to us, that we need the protection. And that protection is not, in the world today, you need to have friends of influence. You would have seen former President of Chile, Michelle Bachelet, who is now the United Nations ambassador, right, for human rights, is making certain comments about a problem that we are facing here. And you may recall that when she was in office, she came to visit us here in CARICOM and undertook to help us lobby against the treatment that we were facing. So we have to maintain those contacts and ensure that we are not alone in this world.
Prime Minister, regarding the situation in Saudi Arabia, regarding the drone attacks, do you think that there could be some level of impact that could sort of affect revenue with the looming talk of increase in oil prices?
Well, I wouldn't want to take it in that case, except that to say if the supply is interrupted to the market, we expect that there would be responses from the market. We are in that market. Our product, oil, and to a lesser extent, gas may be influenced by any interruption of the supply, especially an interruption to a major producer like the Saudis.
On the CJ issue, the Law Association saying they're going to still have meetings and to discuss your inaction, so to speak, of Section 137. Any response to their continued meetings?
The only response I have is that therein lies the proof. It was about 2 weeks ago. The 2 weeks ago, the issue was that there was no freedom in the country and the freedom was under threat. This is proof that we're still a very free country and people are free to do as they please.
Could I ask you about an issue raised by the opposition leader with respect to a private interest of the finance minister in a construction company project? And she raised the fact that the fiscal concessions provided to companies would have facilitated, or his company would have benefited from it, and whether the question of a declaration of his interest was made to the cabinet when those fiscal measures were presented.
Let me just say one thing, right? The opposition has a strategy which is not going to distract me or my government. And the strategy is this. If you don't have any information and you would like information that is damaging to the government or damaging to the country, they get up and start talking about, we have concerns, We have questions. And all I would say, until you get your concerns and your questions answered, you're not going to engage me in that. The opposition leader would not be the source of my guidance on these matters, because the way they're presenting these things, you look at that argument and see how many things, right? Did she declare her interest when she took silk, which is of great benefit to her? She gave herself silk, meaning that she could double her pay as a lawyer. We in the parliament, we vote on a pay increase. Do you see the whole parliament, discuss giving up their right and walk out and say we are all conflicted? There's a way to interpret these things. And I don't know all these concerns. Let her make the specific allegations of wrongdoing on the part of the Minister of Finance. And when she makes the specific allegation of wrongdoing, then I can look at it. But in the meantime, I'm not going to go after a fishing expedition. All these concerns that they have. I saw her doing mathematics about how many apartments and it's being sold for what, and it's 50-odd million. I made a description of the opposition leader before. It did not meet public approval. I will not make it again. But a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still.
So you have the information, you have any information on it which would sort of...
I have not raised the matter. As I said, if the opposition leader has specific instances of wrongdoing on the part of any member of this government, once she makes the specific once she makes a specific allegation on a specific act, I will be able to, but I'm not going to go flitting behind the opposition leader who is looking desperately for a scandal in this government.
Inquire of the minister based on any of the allegations that she has raised.
If I require information about any minister's conduct on any matter in my cabinet, I will certainly do so, but I don't do so under the guidance of the opposition leader.
But that doesn't sound good, because this is coming after Marlene McDonald issue, and now we have allegations which he himself has not said anything on. And these were specific. The specific allegation was that when he was piloting the, I think it's Finance Bill number 2, he did not declare an interest in the block of apartments at Picton Street, and he's been silent. So what are people
Let me ask
saying?
you a question. You know, when that bill was being piloted, those of us who were involved in it, we were we were jokingly calling it the Rambachan bill, because he was a known builder. And as a matter of fact, he was in full support of the measure that we were putting there to encourage it. I didn't hear Mrs. Prasad Bisasa ask Rambachan to get up and declare his interest before he voted.
It didn't come from him.
I am saying, let Mrs. Prasad Bisasa make her specific allegation about the wrongdoing on the part of the Minister of Finance. I have not heard it. I heard her expressing concerns as to if and where and if and how. I'm not dealing with ifs, because that is where the mischief is rooted. And not only on this issue, there are other issues, because Wade Mark is out there now running riot about the Australian purchases of the vessels. He knows that we pay twice the price for the vessels. This government will not be distracted by the UNC looking for a scandal to equate to the ones that they have. No, I'm not. If I have been very clear in my position. If there's an issue to be addressed, I breaks in for nobody. But by the same token, I will not be led down a rabbit hole with every UNC concern and every UNC suspect and every UNC conspiracy theory. This matter was dealt with in full public view. If they believe that they could convert it into a scandal, then let them say so. But they must say specifically what the wrongdoing is. And when they say that, then we can deal with it.
Moving on, the China, I can't pronounce this word, was
Just a China.
the China project, public housing project, that was recently cancelled. We're really trying to find out if Cabinet gave its nod to it, or what was, because there's still this grey area of whether or not HDC, you know, 1 minute Cabinet can rein them in now, but why wasn't Cabinet up front to give the go-ahead or to block the go-ahead?
It is not as simple and straightforward as that. As a matter of fact, this development, like one or two others, is part of if I may say, a debate that is taking place in the country as to what is the authoritative role of statutory authorities and state enterprise boards with respect to the authority under the act that created them, or the Companies Act, as against the authority of the cabinet and the minister responsible. In some instances, there are people who believe, and some of them are lawyers who advise state enterprises, who believe that because they are companies, they do not have to take instructions because they have their own authority to do as they please once the board is established. Some lawyers advise some state companies like that, and from time to time we've had situations that we have to get quite firm on. And of course, there's the other point of view that if something goes wrong in the state enterprise, clearly at the end of the day, the cabinet is responsible, because the cabinet has the ultimate responsibility, having delegated that responsibility to a minister by the prime minister, or to a board, or to an officer in a company. In the case of this HDC matter, this has been a fairly complex matter. It's not a straightforward matter, in that the cabinet approved a framework agreement, which is a non-binding, non-detailed agreement, meaning you are free to go in that direction. And there are interpretations by some people as to what that means. And of course, the HDC proceeded to the point of a contract. But of course, by the time we discovered that there was a problem, the cabinet did what the cabinet had to do, which is to provide the necessary oversight and monitoring, which the cabinet cannot and can never relinquish. And having done that, and for many reasons, including a review of its own position, the cabinet decided that this should not go forward and that we should start over. That is not anything for us to be ashamed of or to be worried about. The system has worked. The cabinet discovered that there was a problem raised in 1 or 2 quarters, did not turn a blind eye, did not fight it. We asked to have it reviewed. And upon review, we found situations that we were not happy with, including situations that we ourselves at cabinet had allowed to go forward. For example, we had in the very early part of the cabinet note that approved that framework agreement, we spoke and authorized the HTC to sell all those units. But upon review, we discovered, is that what we really wanted to approve or to do? Because that was running a little incongruously with another policy that we had issued, which says that too many people can't afford these mortgages, and we need more people to get into those units by rental. So right there was a requirement for the cabinet to review its own position on an approval that was granted. And there were also other things where in seeking to encourage a foreign investor who had certain conditions, HDC, in probably being a little too encouraging, took up responsibilities that it could not discharge on its own. It would have had to discharge those responsibilities with the support and approval of other ministries. And we didn't think that that was a way to go in contracting. So those are the issues, and the cabinet looked at it. But the important thing is, very early in the game, the cabinet realized that there was a problem. We took the opportunity to rectify it, to improve it, and the HGC is coming back out in the very, very near future. And of course, we are hoping on this occasion it would be clearer, and in fact, even, if I may say so myself, even a little more facilitating for local contractors. We hope we don't end up in a situation again where we only have 1 or 2 foreign contractors to deal with. Because if you are dealing with only foreign contractors, well then that creates a certain kind of environment. And now we are hoping that when the HGC comes back out, we will be able to encourage and have on the list of persons to take this public-private partnership forward and have some significant local participation. I must tell you, though, that the decision to go into public-private partnership is not something that there's a lot of practice experience here with us. In fact, we at the level of the cabinet found that HEC took too long to get to a point where they could enter into contracts. There was one contract that, in fact, the very first contract we entered into, the one in Mount Hope, because it was a new approach we were taking, and because there were loose ends that people had such different points of view on, it took over a year, I think it was, between selecting the contractor and being able to sign the contract, because there was such to-in and fro-in between what really this means and what that means. So we know what we are dealing with, and we dealt with it. And therefore, as far as we are concerned, there isn't a problem that requires us to be distracted any further, except to get on with it and to make sure when we do another contract that we end up in a much better place.
US 72 million?
Not necessarily, because one of the things that when we reviewed it at the level of the cabinet, we found that it may very well be, especially since local contractors are saying, even though they were not part of the process in the first part, they're saying that maybe if they're involved, they could do it cheaper. Well, we'll see that. We want to see that, because we will ensure that there's proper value for money for the public. And one of the reasons why we've turned it around is that what the HDC gave certain minimum standards, and I think that was a mistake, because if you give minimum sizes, the builder will bill you the minimum. No builder will bill you more than the minimum, because every foot more you build is a cost. So now that we are going back out, we will not have that little loophole of the minimum size is X, and then end up with only the minimum, and in some instances a bit below the minimum. So we will rectify that.
People have raised the question of the fact that if it is that Mr. Newman George oversaw that contract, which had overturned the onerous and had to do with the union, what then was the thinking in putting it in carrier trading when he would be also negotiating with international?
Yeah, I tell you what, because we didn't put Newman George to run the HDC. This is not a Newman George thing. There are many, many people who were involved in preparing this. And Newman George was he's a chairman, but this was done involving a number of skills and a number of persons. So those who want to make it into their, scandal could focus on personalizing it to Newman George. The board of the HEC is not Newman George. The management of the HEC is not Newman George. As a matter of fact, if my memory serves me right, it may very well be that the management of the HEC earns more than the Prime Minister. So we are not personalizing this. If there is personal responsibility, and we identify that, then we know that. But this is a case of an agency through its resources, including technical and such persons in-house and outside, who came to a position, and at the end of it, we saw it fit to make the changes that we are making now. And we're not going to personalize it to an individual.
I know you just said that, but they've also personalized it and said you were the minister in charge of housing at the time that this contract was released.
Well, let me tell you something about that. I didn't even bother to check that to see if that is so, because that is of no consequence. Because if I happen to be holding a portfolio temporarily while a minister is out or for whatever reason, it has nothing to do with me being the Prime Minister. That's an administrative thing. And I have had no personal involvement or interaction with any. So I didn't even bother to see that is so, because I don't intend to engage that. That is totally irrelevant.
Confidence in Newman George going forward into carrier fuel trading?
If I didn't have confidence in him, I wouldn't allow the cabinet to appoint him there. Okay, thank you all very much. Another issue, another question.
Yes,
Another
the
issue.
issue of the tipping off, that has generated during your answer a lot of discussion. I have several questions. What do you make of the opposition leader's silence on this? But also, what response you have to a lawyer Israel Khan say she's right to remain quiet, and giving a kind of explanation that he was given information by the police officials.
You know, if you had grown up the way I had grown up, raising yard fowls, you know that there's something called pip. Pip. And when the fowl has pip, it can't feed. So it's not all the time that people like Mrs. Prasad Bisasa can talk. Sometimes they have pip. And if she has pip, well, then she can't talk. Huh? No, it's something that happens to the tongue of a fowl, and you have to take it off with ashes. You know that? All right, good. Thank you very much.